Hello, everyone. My name is Tiara Thomas. I am Secretary and Student Affairs Chair for the African American Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve University. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you this evening. The African American Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve was officially established in October 2009, and our purpose is to provide support and networking opportunities for African American alumni of CWRU. We work to provide a forum for the university to recruit students, and we also foster friendships amongst persons connected to the university. So at this time, I hope that you and your loved ones are healthy and safe. And before we get started, I want to go over just a few housekeeping things. So everyone is muted by default, and we ask that you remain muted to limit background noise during the program. We know that some of you have submitted questions in advance, and we hope to get to them throughout the course of the evening. If you have any other questions, please feel free to utilize the chat feature, and we will do our best to make sure that we get all of those answered for you. Also, so that we know who you are, we welcome you to rename yourself by clicking on participants, finding your name, and then using the more option and selecting rename. Finally, if you can, we ask that you turn on your camera so we can see your smiling faces. I am so happy to welcome you to this installment of Profiles of Inclusive Excellence, which is a virtual series in collaboration with the African American Alumni Association, the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, and African American Studies to highlight the work and research of our Black and African American faculty. So today we have the honor of having Dr. Cassie Pittman Claytor. She is the Climo Junior Professor of Sociology at CWRU and the co-director of the African and African American Studies minor. She also coordinates the crime and delinquency concentration for undergraduate sociology majors. She received her Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Pennsylvania and a PhD from Harvard in 2012. Dr. Pittman Claytor's work is focused on how racial minorities, particularly Blacks, manage contemporary forms of racism with the goal of uncovering how contemporary processes of social exclusion and inequality function to disadvantage racial minorities. Drawing on qualitative methods, her scholarship addresses core disciplinary questions concerning the significance of race and racial inequality, while also raising new questions pertaining to the intersectionality of race and class in racial minorities' consumption and purchasing behavior. Her research focuses on the attitudes, experiences, and consumption preferences of the Black middle class, focusing particularly on their economic reality and experiences as consumers. She has investigated Blacks' experiences in retail settings, as well as the mortgage market. And additionally, she has served as the research lead on a national study of retail racism commissioned by Sephora. In her book, Black Privilege, Modern Middle Class Blacks with Credentials and Cash to Spend, Pittman Claytor offers original analysis as to what middle class status buys Blacks who have cultural capital, credentials, and cash on hand. Our host for the evening will be Dr. Heather Burton. Dr. Burton is Senior Director for Faculty and Institutional Diversity with Case Western Reserve University, specializing in gender and racial equity. Dr. Burton also serves as Acting Co-Director for the African and African American Studies program. With that, I will turn over the program to Dr. Burton.
I need to unmute. Thank you, Tiara. Thank you so much. And I want to welcome everyone this evening to our Profiles of Inclusive Excellence. I am excited because I consider myself with the honor and privilege to be able to interview a friend and colleague, someone that we have become more, I don't know what word to use, we have become more working buddies, closer as co-workers, but also I consider Cassie a friend over the year as serving as acting co-directors for the African and African American Studies minor. And so this particular Profiles of Inclusive Excellence is also sponsored by the African and African American Studies minor. So it's an honor to have Cassie, who has been serving in the position as the assistant director for a few years before taking on the role as the acting co-director during Dr. Bostic's sabbatical. But for those of you who are new to our profiles of inclusive excellence, and this may be your first time joining us, Dr. Claytor, we do something here, and I start every interview the same way. And so the way that I start the interview is, I don't know if you remember Sanaa Lathan and Taye Diggs, and in their movie, why did my mind just go blank? In their movie where they talk about hip hop. And so the question brown sugar, and my mind just went, and I start every interview the same way. So you would think I could remember the movie. Cassie, are you making me nervous? Something's wrong. No. So in Brown Sugar, there's always a reference of, when did you fall in love with hip hop? So our question to our guest is, when did you fall in love with your major? So in other words, when did you fall in love with sociology?
So I would say in high school, I knew I liked research, but I thought I was going to go into the sciences. I thought I was going to be a microbiologist and have a lab. And I actually worked at John Carroll in a biochemistry lab as a high school student. So I always knew I really liked research. But the first class I ever took as an undergrad, my first class, my first year, was race and ethnic relations. And that was probably when I fell in love, because I was like, what? I can study these critical issues. I can study people and society. Like, that's far more interesting than being in the lab and running these experiments where like may or may not work out, and you're like by yourself and isolated. Like it just was like, so interesting to me. And it was aligned with a lot of things that I believe in personally, but it was an academic field, and I could, ask questions and then read up and do research. And so that really, I feel like that for me was something that I knew very early on. I was like I knew immediately I was going to become a professor, and that I wanted to do this type of work, to have the autonomy to pursue things that I thought were interesting, and also things that could have an impact on making society more equitable.
I love it. And especially the change. And I can relate, because I think some of you may have heard my story, and the fact that I went through 3 summer engineering programs at Case Western Reserve University, because I was going to be a biomedical engineer. I was dead set on being a biomedical engineer, and went to Ohio State started my first semester, but then I did a play, and it was a Black play, and it changed my trajectory. And so, and I think when I'm listening to you talk, you can see you light up with the passion about the work and the research that you do. Is there anything that personally connects you to this, that causes you to have such a glow about, the work that you do?
Well, I think I always think back to my own personal experience. I grew up in East Cleveland and went to East Cleveland Public Schools. And I went to, at the time, it was like a magnet school. And it was just a wonderfully enriching experience. It was academically rigorous, but it also promoted the idea that it was important to know about Black history, and Black culture was celebrated. And then I went to an elite all-girls school that was almost all white. There were no faculty members of color. And just the glaring differences and opportunities and resources, I think that even as a young person became something that I thought about a lot, or at least was observant of. And so I think what sociology as a field did was it allowed me to put on my critical thinking skills and to read up on what others have theorized, and also to look at evidence to discover patterns, and then to raise my own questions and pursue that as a way of expanding knowledge and what was known. And so it was allowed me to sort of draw on those questions that I might have had that might have gone unanswered as a young girl, but then I could pursue it in a sort of rigorous fashion. And so that's what I think sociology as a field really offered me. And it's unique in that respect, in comparison to other sort of disciplines.
So I'm listening to your experience and your experience growing up and how you left. We have so much in common, Cassie. And I didn't even think, I mean, I know this about you, but to actually hear it, you speak it, because just as you, I left a all Black school district and went to an all white school district. And then throughout college and everything else, it was the same similarity. How do you think that has prepared you to navigate a PWI like Case Western Reserve University?
So I would say, Heather, in my work on the Black middle class and in my book, our experience is not unique to other members of the Black middle class. It often requires them to navigate at a very early age racial settings that really differ in terms of their racial demographics, right? So people talk about that. My respondents talk about that, and I talk about that in my book as having developed a certain capacity. I call it cultural flexibility. So they are developing the ability to adjust, and it's almost like a diplomatic capacity to navigate different types of social terrains. And so I think those early years helped prepare me. So now it's almost second nature to navigate different types of social terrains or settings where I might be a racial token, one of very few or the only Black person in the room, and to do so confidently. I think it in part comes from having so much previous experience, even as a very young child, having done that.
So you use the word tokenism and being the only in the room and Black tokenism. How do you think, or do you think that has had an effect on your resilience, your tenacity, and your ability to be able to move forward?
I mean, certainly, I think it can be certainly challenging. And sometimes I wonder, if I wasn't alone, if I wasn't a token, like, could I be in a more stimulating environment and more enriching environment? And would I be able to, achieve higher levels or, develop different ideas if I was in an environment that was always nurturing and supportive in that way? But at the same time, I think, it just develops a different muscle. And it also always kind of affirms in me that my work extends beyond my literal scholarship to actually engage and push for movement in these issues. So I've been doing a lot of work, and a lot of various sort of corporations have called upon me, and it's sort of I feel like using my expertise to push them to make policy changes that will make the experiences for Black people in their stores more equitable is a part of my calling, even though it's maybe not, specifically me as a scholar or researcher, but it's a part of my job to raise public awareness and to create platforms and educate the masses in a way.
So I'm listening to you, and when I want to switch gears, I want to go back a little bit. I want to go back to the title of your book, and only because it stands out to me. I don't know if anyone else cares, but I care. And I want to talk about, how did you come up with this title for the book? And then I'm going to take two questions that are in the chat that I think are relevant to staying on the subject lines of your book.
So, I have had, this book has been in the works for a long time, and it's been, constant iterations and rewritings and further developments and adding of chapters. And so I really can't remember when I came up with the title Black Privilege, because it was a while ago. But I think what I wanted to highlight is this idea that, to go against the idea, which is incorrect, is that most Black people are poor or Blackness is synonymous with poverty. So I really wanted to highlight the fact that there are a growing number of African Americans who are college educated, who have elite credentials, who work in prestigious occupations, who have money to spend, and that is something we need to recognize and contend with. And also to acknowledge that doesn't free them from racism, that doesn't buffer them from exclusion or from discrimination, but we need to acknowledge the sort of heterogeneity of the Black experience, and also acknowledge the degree to which people have been able to strive and achieve, right? Which I think is often quite remarkable. Even in my own experience, my grandfather, he always says he only went to school when it was raining, because if it wasn't raining, he had to work on the farm. So at max, he has a 4th grade education. My grandmother maybe has an 8th grade education. So for me to have a PhD from Harvard, that is an accomplishment and achievement over intergenerations, over multiple generations, that should be acknowledged. And I think in the scholarship, there needs to be a more comprehensive understanding of the Black experience. And part of that means highlighting the ways that Black people have achieved, that we have some degree of privilege. It's not the same as white privilege in any way, shape, or form, but to not acknowledge that we have these achievements, I think, is to do a disservice. And it also minimizes the Black experience to one that's always of deprivation. And I don't think that's really the case, right? We have lots of accomplishments, lots to be proud of, lots of achievements. And we're also people who like to have a good time and enjoy life and enjoy life's luxuries. So I think that needs to be sort of brought to the table.
I agree. And I think, in that, with, looking at that idea of Black achievement and Black privilege and Black accomplishment, that there are Black people who have accomplished a bit, but they're always undermined. And we don't talk about that, and we don't celebrate that, which is one of the reasons, even within our own campus, why we do these profiles of inclusive excellence for our Black faculty, is to show that we have some great Black faculty on our campus that are doing great work and great research. And I remember someone said to me that, we don't have any Black faculty. And I was like, no, I got enough to do 2 years of a series to highlight some. And so we have some, doesn't mean that we have enough. Now, don't get me wrong there. Don't get me wrong that we have enough, but there are some that are doing great work. And if we don't celebrate you all, we run the risk of losing you. And so it's really important to celebrate the work that you do and everything. And I want to take this question from the audience, Cassie, and I'm not sure if you can answer it or if your research is around this, but is Cleveland one of the cities with a sizable African-American middle class or not?
Sadly, it is not. I wish I have a chart that looks at it. I think something like, I'll have to think about the specifics, but I don't know the specific statistics, but I recently looked it up, and I think it's something like 15% of Blacks in Cleveland are college educated, which is a dwarfed in consideration to places like New York, DC, Atlanta. And then I think there's I want to say it's maybe 130,000 college educated Blacks in Cleveland. Whereas in New York, it's 650,000 in terms of sheer numbers, right? And so Cleveland is one of the cities that actually has a far smaller Black middle class in comparison to other major cities. But across the board, the places that I think people in their consciousness think about as places where there's a lot of prosperity for Blacks are the places where there tend to be large concentrations of college educated Blacks, like DC, Atlanta, New York. And the places that don't have as much are places like Detroit and like Cleveland.
Thanks for sharing that. And it makes sense as we think about demographics and geographics, and when you think about those areas and the prosperity that happens within those areas. And
Heather, I would say Case could do a wonderful job of increasing that, right? If
definitely,
if that became a priority, we could be. I had a friend who at one time was at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame was a place originally, or at least in the past, where a lot of Irish and Italian Catholics could go and be college educated and be upwardly mobile. And so part of the university sort of realignment was now to think about Latinos who also tend to be Catholic, and cultivating that as a place of mobility for that population. So, I sometimes think, Case is so exceptional at getting students into medical school. What if we made it a place, or made it a priority to make it a place where Black students got into medical school, where we created those types of pipelines that could change or help the medical profession diversify, if we became a leader in that domain, or in engineering, all these different areas, in nursing even. I mean, across the board, if that was an institutional priority, wouldn't that be wonderful? And that would have an impact on the entire Cleveland population. It's not by chance that places like Atlanta or DC have lots of college educated Blacks, because they have places like Howard and Spelman and Morehouse and all those other places that are educating that population. So I think we as a university and alumni society, and we have a role to play in helping to create more Black college educated folks in the Cleveland area.
I agree. And I know that there are individuals and programs that are trying to come to fruition to be able to do that, because we have the capability, we have the possibility, and we have pipeline programs. So we have pipeline programs that are on our campus. It's a matter of taking advantage. And I say this in most meetings, and Cassie, you've heard me say this plenty of times, is that we've got to be able to communicate this information and work together so that everyone knows what the left hand is doing with the right hand, and so that we can come together and take full advantage of a lot of things that we have on campus that people are just not aware of.
And also, as like I have a lot of family in Cleveland, a lot of family. And I know I've tried to look for summer programs for my nieces, and the only ones that are available in STEM fields my nieces are Black, are ones that cost quite a bit of money. So if I'm a faculty member and I can't find a pipeline program on Case's campus for little Black girls, then I don't know who could find them.
And that's a problem, because they exist. And that's what's sad about it, because you have Milani Joseph that has her engineering program. You have the other programs. You have I always say it wrong, the sports program. You have a couple of faculty that are doing programs. And this is and I don't want to get on what OIDEO is doing, but one of the things that we are trying to do is actually compile a list and a central location where all programs that are servicing underrepresented students, neighborhood community, are listed in one place. I was told at one time when I was over the Noah AGAP Summer Bridge program that there were 70 programs that were geared towards underrepresented students on our campus for the summer. I was like, where are they? I was like, can somebody show them to me? And this came from legal, that we had this many programs because we were talking about documentation and paperwork for filling out for minors. But guess what? We're going to find programs for your nieces for next summer.
Then maybe it's a matter of just PR and communicating it to the community. So,
Yeah. And we can go through a whole lot of conversation about why we don't know. And I have my understandings and knowings of why things aren't shared, and it's not even, I think, intentionally that they're not shared, but we also know that sometimes people are territorial about their programs, and so they don't share what's available. But I don't want to get on that soapbox. But what I do want to ask you, Cassie, is being a Black woman, what are some of your biggest challenges in academia?
Well, I would say, when I came for new faculty orientation, it was probably 100 new faculty across the university. And I think I was the only Black person there, if I can remember correctly. Maybe one other. If it was somebody else, it was hard to remember. And I remember they said, when you're teaching, if you're young, or if you're a woman, or if you're a person of color, students might not perceive you as being legitimate or knowledgeable. They might question you or try to, in some sense, to undermine your authority in the classroom. So, it might make sense to like wear a suit or make sure to mention where you got your PhD from. And so I do think that's like, that was like before, I walked really on campus and had been to my office. It was like already a challenge to have to demonstrate my legitimacy to be here in this academic space. And to have to do that to students. So that's like step one, right? And then I think you have to do the same thing to colleagues. I remember colleagues who were surprised that learned that like my parents were still married, and that, so it's like, and even going to faculty receptions, and everyone there, it's like, there's Black wait staff. And, those are all the challenges that you kind of face. Those are some of the challenges I have faced. But I think I've been groomed for this in a way. And I am hoping to push for a change in all the little domains that I have any influence or power, to always try to help the university evolve and improve, so the experiences of people who come after me are different.
And if you've never had the opportunity to sit and talk with Dr. Claytor, you would realize, or you will if you ever get an opportunity, how passionate she is about the work that she does, about helping students, and about seeing the progress of Black students and the Black community. So, we thank you for being a part of the university and having that vision and having that just tenacity to want to keep going and want to keep pushing and keep bettering things for the Black community. I was thinking as you were talking, and we're talking about the challenges as a Black woman, and in that, research shows that Black women, the higher they achieve academically, the higher they achieve professionally, they lose life expectancy. What are you doing to counter those stressors, Dr. Claytor?
So, I mean, that is, that's a huge challenge. And our department, the sociology department, does a lot of work on disparities in health. And so I'm very cognizant of these additional sort of physiological and mental costs that come from navigating these often obstacles that come from being race, but also having certain class advantages. So, I try to take advantage. CASE has a number of resources on mindfulness. And so I try to be mindful. I try to meditate. I do acupuncture when pre-COVID. And I try to maintain a sense of balance. So I try to take one day, Saturday, where I don't do any, email or work-related things. So just try to maintain a sense of balance. But I'm also very, very lucky that I do have a wonderful familial support network, and they help me keep things in perspective as well. So realizing what's most important. I have two grandparents. My grandfather is 90, my grandmother is 89, and I have a plethora of nieces and nephews, and my siblings and my parents, aunts and uncles, little cousins. And that helps, I think, keep me grounded in realizing that my academic life and my work life is only part of my life. And I think that balance is key.
Yeah. I think so too. And that's very important. And like you said, just having the support of family. We have a question from the audience. Can you discuss Black women showing up authentically in predominantly white spaces?
So that's an excellent question. And in my book, I talk about how middle-class Blacks navigate white workplace settings, and then how they navigate, in comparison, majority minority workplace settings. And so a lot of it has to do with, they are very astute observers of their surroundings, and they often do make modifications to how they talk, how they walk, how they style their hair, if they perceive as coming across as too Black is going to restrict their advantages. So I think that there's, and interestingly enough, you can be legally fired for wearing certain hairstyles in many places, because that's at the federal level, the legal precedent, right? As long as it's equally applied to everyone. So if they have a no braids policy, as long as no racial group can wear braids, it's seen as not discriminatory, right? And I don't think we're often cognizant of that we aren't legally protected from being dismissed on the basis of something as simple as a hairstyle. So I think that's a part of the navigation. But I think increasingly, as people move up the ladder, they have a bit more power and influence. And I think it's always a balancing act. And even in my work, some of the respondents who did wear their hair natural would say that they would try to always be very neat and tidy and professional with their attire as a way to sort of balance out any negative stereotypes of Black people with their hair in their natural state. So I think it's a constant challenge. It also depends on the workplace. In certain workplaces, different standards are evident. But the interesting thing I found was that when they worked in majority minority workplaces, like things like hair and appearance didn't matter at all. They talked about the quality of their work. And I think that's also a call for more diversity, right? So that people can be themselves and don't feel like they have to play a game in order to prevent being retaliated against or negatively perceived. But unfortunately, I think the reality is that there are some costs when you don't conform to whatever the workplace norms are. And a lot of places, the workplace norms do not acknowledge, accept, or recognize or value Black culture. And I think our hair and our appearance and all those, the way we talk is a part of being Black. So I think it is actually a complicated question, but I think people are very capable of sort of having to make adjustments. And sometimes I think we think of having to make adjustments as a bad thing, but in reality, we do it all the time. So, you know, for example, when I talk to my grandparents, I talk to them a certain way. When I talk to my tween nieces, I talk to them a certain way. That doesn't mean I'm any less authentic in those two different settings. It just means I know who I'm dealing with and I gotta be a little bit of a chameleon. So I think it's good in some respects. It's a unique ability for Black people to be able to be a chameleon. Now, should they have to do that all the time? Of course not. And ideally, they'll have to do it when they want to, not when they feel that if they don't do so, they'll be at a disadvantage. But
yeah, I'm listening to you, and I agree that, you know, that's one of the gifts and talents of Black people is to be able to adjust and adapt. But it's also what Ibram Kendi argues against, and Robert knows that I love quoting Ibram Kendi, mm-hmm. But this is what VP Solomon, this is what he with Ibram Kendi, you know, argues against, and how to be an anti-racist is these ideas of making Black culture assimilate to mainstream, making Black culture assimilate to Eurocentric ways. And I think you point out very clear, especially when it comes to a Black woman's hair and wardrobe. And of course, with my new red hair, we've had this conversation. I've had this conversation all day with people, but it's that adjustment of when can I show up authentically in this space and be myself and be who I am and talk the way that I want to talk, use my hand gestures, move my head, do whatever. And it's not going to be, it's not going to have someone on pins and needles because I'm quote unquote too Black for the space. And I think that's what we deal with. And that's what we fight against, especially when we talk about in predominantly white spaces, is that authenticity of being there. There's and so I really appreciate the fact that, you touch on that in your book and you share your own experience of how to show up in those spaces. And there's a question from the chat, and I'm going to read it in entirety just because I want to make sure that we get all the points. But it's hearing your background and coming from one similar. As a professor that has experienced a transition from a predominantly Black educational community to a PWI, both as a student and academic, how does that perspective reflect for you in the classroom, in the academy, and not so much from your book, but from your own personal experience? But I'm assuming that your book ties in quite a bit, not only with your research, but also things of how it affected you personally.
I mean, so I, personally, and as is reflected in my book, I think that's part of what it means to be Black and middle class, is having to navigate different settings, the majority Black settings and the majority white settings. So I say, you know, because my work was done in New York, going to a Black Baptist church on Sunday and then going to all white Wall Street firm on Monday, like that, in every place in between. That is a part of the Black middle class experience for the most part. Having to navigate, and it really may be a part of the middle class experience of racialized minorities more broadly. But my work focuses on the Black middle class. But in thinking about my own experience, I mean, one of the things that I try to do is in the classroom, for example, is to draw on examples from Cleveland and to highlight how, so most recently we were talking about social structural causes of crime in my criminology class. So I highlighted all these social structural issues that is evident in the city of Cleveland, whether it be deindustrialization, racial segregation. And I showed students, you are here in Cleveland, and this is what it looks like in Cleveland. And so this might help explain why crime is elevated in this neighborhood in Cleveland, because there are these social structural conditions that make it so that if you're poor, you're deeply ensnarled in contexts that make it difficult for you to move out of it. So using the local example, drawing from Cleveland to highlight social inequality is one way I try to do it, or just trying to find creative ways to bring in questions of race. So in my economic sociology class, that might be talking about the experiences of Black startups and their difficulty raising capital as a way of demonstrating how social networks and who you know can play an impact on your success as a business. So just integrating in those examples, which, you know, when I was taking some of these similar classes, or I've TA'd as a graduate student for similar classes, like those examples were not the ones that were integrated into the course material. So I think that's one of the ways I do that in the classroom. And in the academy, I think it's just kind of interacting with others and trying to highlight my experience doing things like this to just make it clear to students that you don't have to come from a certain type of background in order to be a professor, right? Or outlining the path that I went through to become a professor to show how it's possible, or the route. You know, I think part of it is having representation, is being able to then follow similar paths or imagine that those paths exist, that you can travel along. And so I try to be that sort of, we, in our sorority, there's fortitude, and it's like one hand up, one hand back. You got to constantly reach forward, strive forward, but also uplift. And so that's kind of my approach more broadly, I think.
Yes. And which takes me to the idea of Sankofa also, reaching forward while looking back. And then, but I also, and I will share that, yes, Cassie and I are of the same sorority. We are members of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. So I just had to put that in. Since she brought it up, I wasn't going to bring it up, but since she brought it up. But Cassie, there's a question from the chat, another one about your book. And then I'm going to kind of change gears and ask you some more questions about you, because I want the audience to really get to know you, and besides just your research. But thank you for sharing your work with us. As mentioned in your book, there is this misconception that the Black middle class and the Black working class are divided or experience conflict between one another. And your research showed that the Black middle class actually supports and believe in racial uplift in the Black community. Can you talk a little more about this finding?
So I sometimes I think that people like to highlight tension when there is heterogeneity among Blacks, right? Like, oh, we're all at each other's necks. And so I didn't find that when I talked to middle-class Blacks. They had friends, family members, cousins, siblings, church parishioners who they sat next to every Sunday. And they were in different economic brackets, and they didn't despise them. they saw them as like them, or even they saw them as critical to their own success. You know, like I was able to make it because my mom sacrificed for me. And she might not have had the same opportunities, but her sacrifice enabled me to be here. So how they even explained their own success was not in individualistic terms, like I worked hard and I'm smart and I achieved. They said, I'm blessed, you know, and these people sacrificed for me to be here. So this idea that there's this, you know, a great rift, I didn't find evidence for it. But at the same time, are there sort of differences in cultural tastes and lifestyle preferences? In some respects, yes, right? There was evidence of that, but not so extensively that there was some bridge that couldn't be divided. And people were very much ideologically committed to racial uplift. They felt a sense of obligation to help Blacks who were in positions that didn't share their same advantages. And also, I would note, there wasn't a lot of tension across ethnic lines either. So I had actually a fairly diverse sample which is very representative of a New York Black population of across different ethnic groups. And they all express Black pride and enjoying living among in a Black neighborhood, right? Not all, but those were common themes. And I think in the literature, we also see a lot of discussion of this sort of ethnic tensions, which I didn't find. And some argue that the Black middle class is also a multi-ethnic middle class. And I would argue that my work kind of supported that. And I think you see that a case, it certainly was true where I was an undergrad. So when I lived off campus my senior year, we had my one friend who was Liberian, my other friends that was Jamaican. You know, it was me, I was African American. My one friend was mixed. It was a mixture of people, and we all socialized, ate, laughed, enjoyed discussions together. So I think that is actually probably more the case than there is often depicted. It's often depicted as this, you know, lots of divides within the Black community, but I didn't really find evidence for that. I didn't find evidence. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just wasn't very salient.
Yeah, and I think very often, and we know this, where it can be one instance and one instance turns into everybody, and it turns into this big thing that there is a rift and a divide between the middle class Blacks and other Blacks and other ethnicities, because I remember in undergrad hearing that type of conversation, but never experiencing it. And so I think it's things that, you know, and then we can go through a whole history lesson, Cassie. I know you can join me in it when we talk about how the Black community has been split just because of philosophical thought and finding our place within society. So all of that goes into play. If you have more questions for Dr. Claytor, please put those in the chat. But I will ask, what are 3 words that describe you?
Okay, 3 words that would describe me. So I would say that I'm a striver, and I really, if I put my mind to something and I'm going to work hard, I'm going to try my best to execute it at the highest level. Like I don't kind of half step. I think that's how I was kind of raised in a way. My grandparents, I mean, you know, they didn't have much education, but everything that they did to the best of their ability. And so I think they ingrained that lesson in me, and my mother, you know, like went down the line. So I'm very much a striver in that regard, willing to work hard to achieve my objectives, whatever they may be. I think I'm very proud. I'm very proud to be Black. I'm very proud to be from Cleveland. People have told me I could sell Cleveland. I should be on the tourist board or something, because I can talk about all the wonderful things about Cleveland to people who would probably have very negative views otherwise. And so I'm very proud. I'm proud of my family. I'm proud of my accomplishments. But, and I'm proud of being who I am, and unapologetically so. And I would say that I'm a leader in a way, in my family, I try to take lead here at Case in my position and in other realms as well. Even with my work at Sephora, whatever setting I might be, I'm going to be there to try to steer the course in the right direction and also offer my opinions, and not unsolicited, but, when I think it's critical and necessary, and try to hope for or aim for the best possible outcome.
And I know I'm listening to your 3 words with striver, proud, and leader. And I would agree, those are all words that describe you. But I had another thought as I was listening to you talk about these 3 words and these descriptive words that describe you. And in my mind popped, what were your first thoughts when you got the call from Sephora?
I actually wrote an op-ed that was somewhat critical of them. So I was sort of surprised to hear from them. So I was sort of surprised that they would reach out, because I kind of had wrote sort of a somewhat not critical, but just thinking like, how might we do things better? And so, and then I was very skeptical also at first of their intentions, because, where I went to undergrad, there's a business program, and the Wharton School has an undergrad business program, and people are very corporate minded. Like, I never have been in an environment where corporate America, businesses, investment banking, Wall Street, where there was a large fraction of people who that was their end goal objective. And I always kind of eschewed that. And so I think I was also kind of skeptical of what is their intentions as a corporation as it relates to this issue, right? Are they serious? And I was actually very surprised by, in some respects, the degree to which they really take very seriously their work in this domain. And we're very receptive when I would make certain points about, maybe this is a different way. You need to think differently about this, or that's not enough, or that's not, they were very willing to be responsive to if they were going in the wrong direction. But I definitely was very skeptical and also cautious, because I think also, like, part of me is like, I don't want to be used to legitimate something that's not aligned with my own values, if that makes sense. So I wanted to make sure too that they were, that their objectives and my objectives were actually aligned. And I'll say I've gotten approached by corporations since, and I've given them a hard pass, because I feel like my goal as a researcher is to highlight findings that can actually improve conditions. And if you're not really wanting to engage in any sort of deep level work in that domain, then I'm not the person for you.
Makes sense. I will add from the chat, and this is from your graduate assistant, Jacob, who says, Dr. Pittman Claytor is a local hero. For additional words to describe you. So
I was thinking, and Jacob knows this too, the only other thing that might be surprising to people is that I feel as though I'm funny, and lots of people feel that I'm funny. So that was actually one of the things my sister said in my wedding speech, that once I get tenure, I might go on the road as a comedian. And I told Jacob, I could be Kevin Hart. I could have a sellout.
I'll come see you, Cassie. If nobody else comes, I will be there in the front row supporting you.
So I do have a good sense of humor, I would say, too.
Yes, I would agree. You mentioned in being proud that you are a proud Clevelander. So what is it about Cleveland that you like? What is it that you like to do in Cleveland? Why are you so proud of Cleveland?
I think Cleveland, first of all, the people here are, I've lived on the East Coast for a long time, and I describe Boston as New England hostility instead of like Southern hospitality. So it actually took me a while to adjust back to how people are so nice and personable and friendly. So that's one of the things that I think makes Cleveland stand out and be in at least in the Black community. I think it's because so many people migrated from the South and maybe they have that sort of urban countryness to them. So I find the people are wonderful, but I also think Cleveland has all these world-class institutions, so you can get your fill of art and theater, but it's not overwhelming, and it's affordable. And we have the lake, which I think is beautiful, a beautiful resource. That's one of the things I like to do, walk along the lake or jog along the lake. We have beautiful architecture. There's some beautiful homes in Cleveland, very, very, in comparison to other cities that are very new. Cleveland has a lot of history. And I think that that's very evident, at least in our architecture. So I think there's a lot to be said for Cleveland. And I wish, in the class that I teach about Cleveland, there's a time period in Cleveland's history where I say it really was like Abu Dhabi and Silicon Valley, because there was so much wealth concentrated due to the oil boom. And there was a lot of technological innovation. So Cleveland was one of the places that had the highest number of patents as related to the oil refinery industry. And so, if we could get to a point if we could come back in some way to that point where we do have more, research, innovation, and be a hub in that respect, I think that would be great. But at least that is a part of our roots and our heritage. And I think that makes us a unique place. So whenever I have friends who come to visit Cleveland, I make sure they have a good time. So yes, I'm a very proud Clevelander.
I hear it all in that explanation. And people probably don't know, you mentioned the theater, that Cleveland is the second largest theater district. And a lot of people don't know that, of how much theater and Broadway plays we actually have here.
And Caribou House.
Yes, and we have Caribou House, which,
yes.
Being a Black theater is prominent to our city, and the work that has come out of there and the individuals that have come out of Caribou.
Mm-hmm. Who come through pass through Caribou.
What'd you say? I'm sorry?
Who have come through or passed through Caribou.
Yes.
Got their start at Caribou.
Mm-hmm. Where's your favorite place to eat?
At
besides
my grandma's
Luna Bakery
table, probably.
What'd
And my grandparents owned a restaurant for 37 years on Superior Avenue. So that was where I ate a lot of meals. And I still, eat meals with my grandparents.
Now, what restaurant did your grandparents own?
It was called Sister Raffy's Seafood. So they sold fish. It was like a fish takeout spot. Mm-hmm. But they had everybody in, the former Mayor Michael White, the Jackson Five, everybody and their mother came through there. And for them to be in business for 37 years, I think that's a testament to the product.
Yes, exactly. We have one more question from the chat, and then we'll wrap up with some final comments. But the question is, I'd like to continue the conversation. Wait. Heather Bain says that she loves it. Her mom went to the restaurant every Friday. I'm a CWRU medical 93 physician surgeon building a new wellness social enterprise at the intersection of aesthetics, technology, and spirituality. Would love for, that was my chat. Sorry, my chat moved too fast and I missed my question. Dr. Harris, that wasn't supposed to, I'll read that to you. You can see that in the chat. That wasn't the question. The question is, I enjoyed a very good career as a financial advisor. For 30 years, I tried to attract more Black students to the financial services world, especially venture capital, private equity, and money management, because less than 1% of the people in those fields are Black. How can we change that?
So that's obviously a big question. And I think those fields, especially, they're not just predominantly white. There are places that privilege white culture in a very specific kind of way. And it's not even just white culture, it's a very masculine, certain type of doggy dog world type of way. And so I think it would be wonderful if there could be some cultural change in those places to make them more inclusive, and that would help. But I think part of it is also creating pipeline programs, creating awareness. So, I don't think a lot of kids growing up in various neighborhoods, even middle-class Black kids, know that investment banking is a field, or some of those other types of fields in finance, or what exactly they do. What is the leveraged buyout industry? And so I think part of it might be making those types of fields more commonly known, and also creating programs to help. But it certainly is not unique, because less than 1% of all veterinarians are Black. So that's not a field where people don't know what a veterinarian is, but something is even in medicine, there's not that many Black physicians. It's less than 10%. I feel like it's something like 5% of all medical doctors are Black. So we have a lot of work in all of these domains. And so I think some of the same types of solutions, like making sure that they're more inclusive environments, meaning if you didn't play lacrosse, or, you don't golf, you don't get excluded from, conversations or opportunities that then might be necessary to cultivate relationships with clients that then help you advance your career, So I think that would also help in some of those fields where all those types of privileges are awarded to certain people, but only that those types of experiences aren't necessarily widespread, right? So.
Yes, thank you for answering that question, Dr. Claytor. And so to kind of end us tonight, one of the things that I'll ask you is, what is important to you outside of Case Western Reserve University? I know you mentioned your family, you told us why you love Cleveland, but what else is important to you outside of the institution? Because you do such a great job within the institution. And maybe I'm biased because I work closely to you, so I know all that you do. I don't know, but outside of the institution, what is it that Dr. Claytor, what's important to her?
That's a great question. And I think, when I first moved back, because I'm from East Cleveland, and I also, as much as I love Cleveland broadly, I really love East Cleveland. And I would just love to see it flourish as a sort of Black neighborhood enclave community. And so I'm also very passionate about politics in a way, local politics. I try to stay very informed, and even national politics, and just aware of what's going on. So that's something else that is something I'm interested in and passionate about, though I don't have as much time to be as involved in. But that's something I'm, thinking about local politics, thinking about how do we improve the local political establishment so that it actually is more efficient and effective, is something that also interests me. And that's, my dad was mayor of East Cleveland when I was maybe about 5 years old, 3 years old, when I was maybe about 5 or 6. And so I remember going to City Hall and going to parades and going to different churches with my parents, or going to community group meetings. And so when I first moved back, I was doing a lot of that. And I had to slow my roll a little bit because I'm tenure track. I'm not tenured. But that's something I deeply enjoy. And I think that's also something where there's such a need for people who have new ideas and who can help advance and articulate new ways of and also fight for what's right, because a lot of communities of color their voices don't get heard, and so elevating their voices and supporting them in whichever way I can is something I'm also very passionate about.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing this evening. I have enjoyed our conversation, and I'm glad that you were able to join us tonight for our Profiles of Inclusive Excellence. And just to highlight Dr. Cassie Pittman Claytor, who is doing some wonderful work on campus and off campus. And if you haven't had a chance to purchase her book, please make sure you also buy her book, Black Privilege. And so that you can read and learn more about the middle-class Black community. And I am going to, I will mention our next Profiles of Excellence, which is March 30th at 6 p.m. with Dr. Carolyn Harmon. And for that, I am signing off and turning the program back over to the Alumni Association and Tierra Thomas to give us our final or closing, or I see Crystal unmuted.
Well, thank you. So thank you so much, Dr. Claytor. We really appreciate it. This was amazing. It was so interesting to hear your perspective. So we thank you and we appreciate you for sharing. As Heather said, our next Profiles of Inclusive Excellence is on March 30th. So we hope that you can join us in that. Also, if you want to find out more about the African American Alumni Association, you can go to case.edu/alumni. And you can follow us on our Facebook if you search Case Western Reserve University African American Alumni Association. On Twitter, we are CWRU AAAA Alumni. And with that, I'll turn it over to Crystal just in case there's any more remarks. And if not, we hope that everyone has a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Tierra. On behalf of the Alumni Association and the African American Alumni Association, I would like to thank Dr. Pittman Claytor for this great conversation, and also our friend and colleague and campus partner, Dr. Heather Burton, for hosting and bringing us these excellent opportunities highlighting our African American faculty on campus. If you enjoyed any of these conversations, please be on the lookout for our Women of Wonder Sharing Her Story series starting in March. All alumni, students, friends are welcome to join us as we celebrate and feature alumni leaders, innovators, champions who persevere to make history, are reclaiming their stories and creating new living her story. So we're going to be featuring African American alumna, Justice Melody Stewart, also Deborah Wolfong, who's an engineering alum, and our Dr. Heather Burton will be interviewing Dr. Betty Kurz, who has a phenomenal story. So definitely be on the lookout for that information about our Women of Wonder series. Again, I thank you and have a good evening, all of you.
Thank you, everyone. This was wonderful.